Okay, from our studios this week in Detroit and in Tampa, this is Green Tag Theme Park in 30. I'm Philip, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host Scott Swenson of Scott Swenson Creative Development. On Green Tag, we look at the top news each week and explain why it matters to business professionals. And this week, we're going to be talking a little bit about the more news from Six Flags. So there's always news from Six Flags nowadays. And then we're going to look at the latest global trends report from IAAPA and discuss some of the takeaways from that. So first, more is brewing over at Six Flags. we got.
Tis the season for brewing. Tis the season for brewing. Yes, there's a coven sitting around a big cauldron somewhere, and it's certainly brewing all right.
And I guess two more members of that coven are leaving. So
yeah,
Six Flags did announce that two more members of the board are going to be resigning at the end of the year. This follows news, of course, of the CEO stepping down. So the two that are leaving, first is Salim Basoul, which was the previous CEO of the previous Six Flags only chain, right? So he's leaving along with Daniel, who is the lead independent director. Now, Salim would seem like the more important, not more important, but he has a lot of projects still in the mix. But they said that he will be staying on as a consultant for the company through the opening of the new Six Flags Qiddiya Park in Saudi Arabia. And that's where the other piece of news came in, where in the initial press release where they announced that Salim and Daniel were going to be stepping down at the end of the year, they mentioned that the Six Flags Park was going to be moving its opening date till 2026. However, very soon after that press release went out, they issued a correction saying that no, it was actually going to still open in 2025. And so that created a second piece of news about that kind of back and forth. But the official news, I guess, is that these two are stepping down. And like I said, that follows the news that we had previously about Richard Zimmerman stepping down. Now, a replacement or successor for Zimmerman has not been named. So it's kind of like Zimmerman will be around while they find a replacement, and then also Salim will be around until this opens as a consultant. So it's not a complete loss of this. But in terms of what Basoul said, I just thought his quote was interesting. He said, leading the Six Flags board of directors through a period of transformation has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my career. Together, we built a stronger, more innovative company, one that successfully completed the industry's largest merger, expanded its growth opportunities, and refined the guest experience through technology and creativity. I'm especially proud of that Six Flags has been recognized as one of the best and brightest companies to work for nationwide, proof of our exceptional culture and dedication of our people. I'm not sure how much of that is true.
Well,
but,
I don't know whether I have just become in this world, or because of my age or whatever, I've just kind of become cynical, especially when I immediately recognize rhetoric speak. And that's exactly, basically, let's break this down here. I'm so proud. I'm so glad that we got through this transition, proving that this is a great place to work. And now I'm leaving. And not only leaving work, we got to point out he's not just leaving work. He is now actually leaving the industry. Because he's lined up a new gig as the chairman of a Canadian online grocer. So it was like, oh my God. My guess, and this is pure speculation. So pure speculation on my part. My guess is he feels so beat up by this whole transition period that it is time to focus on something new, something different, and to just kind of relax a little bit. I don't know whether that's true or not. That may be oversimplifying the situation, but it's unfortunate because, again, I've become very, very cynical when I hear phrases like "together we built." As you're leaving, you're saying "together we built." I just get a little sarcastic, I guess, about that because it's hard to buy.
Yeah, it's one of those whatever the saying is, where everything you say is an admission. You kind of a thing where it's like,
that never happens.
Well, why there are other things he could have said. So it's kind of like drawing attention to these things almost makes it seem like it's a weird
the lily a bit. It's gilding the lily. I mean, if he had said, this has been a rewarding experience for me. I'm very proud of what we were able to accomplish, but it is I've recognized that it's time for me to move on.
Yes, right.
That's a great story.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
This still, but he's still a consultant, so he can't necessarily. He has to still toe the party line, which I understand. We've all worked for corporations. I understand that necessity, but it's a whole paragraph that basically says absolutely nothing, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, and so speaking of him staying on as a consultant, so that this is interesting again because I think the first time we heard about Richard, I mentioned how that was kind of like not a great sign when you were trying to execute this big vision, right? That we talked about. They had the whole leadership vision where they presented to investors about this plan that we thought was actually a good plan, but where we have argued, and again, this is just us where we have been arguing it, is it kind of seems like it has not really been executed. And maybe that's because there's so many staff. It's such a big who knows why, but the execution doesn't seem like it's quite gotten there. And so then you're saying we're going to remove leadership. Well, that's never a good sign classically when you're trying to get a new initiative done through, is the leadership's changing. And now it seems like it's now more leadership is leaving. However, maybe not, because a lot of the pushback we got in comments when I said that was that he's still going to be around anyway, and that this gives the opportunity for new blood to come in and maybe connect more of the park manager, park nation, maybe basically be a better bridge. And so, I think maybe that's the same case here. Like Salim will still be around if somebody has a question about working with the government in Qiddiya or something about logistics. He'll still be around, but maybe it gives the opportunity for a better bridge between the people that need to actually execute, which would be the park managers and the area managers, and then the people who are in the ivory tower, which is the board. So maybe. So, well, I mean, I'm not, yeah.
I think that anytime you have two major conglomerates coming together, there's always going to be growing pains. And sometimes it is beneficial to, instead of doing it Six Flags way or Cedar Fair way, is to do it a new way and to find new people who can and execute that.
Yep.
With this number, however, abandoning ship, I think, is probably a safe analogy to use. With this number of people abandoning ship, I have to ask, what do they know that we don't know?
That's true.
Because they have information that
that's true.
will not be released, nor should it be. It's proprietary business stuff. But and could it be something? It may be something as simple as they know what the new leadership is going to look like, and they don't necessarily recognize their place in it, or they don't recognize their it's contrary to their belief in leadership. Because let's face it, there's a million different ways to lead a company. And, well, not a million, but there's many different ways to lead a company. And sometimes, it is best for the company overall to cut ties with the opposition. It's time to say, okay, we're good. Now, I don't know. I didn't see it anywhere in the article, but maybe you've seen anything. What kind of exit packages did these guys get? What kind of golden parachutes were there?
So I didn't see that. I'm sure the information is probably out there somewhere, but I didn't see it in the articles that I read.
I'm assuming that there's something.
There's always something.
Yeah, there's always something. But again, I hope that what we're saying here is true for the company as a whole. I hope that there is, it will bring in will open up the possibility to bring in some new blood. The challenge, I think, is going to be finding that balance between pruning to allow for new growth and cutting so far back that the tree dies. So you kind of have to find, in any corporation, I'm not even speaking necessarily about Six Flags, in any corporation where you have a change of strategy or a change of leadership strategy, you have to kind of find that balance. You have to figure out how much can we trim back so that we can allow for some new growth, some new ideas, some new people, some new experiences, and how much is it when we cut too far back that we don't have any sort of history knowledge. You're kind of going in green because then you're tempted or likely to make the same mistakes that have been made before. Because the first time they made those mistakes, it sounded like a good idea, and if there's nobody around to remember that we thought it was a good idea but it wasn't, then you just end up spinning your wheels and making the same mistakes over and over again. So I'm hoping that this is not the beginning of a landslide trend, and I'm hoping that the folks who commented, it opens up space for new blood, new ideas. But I don't know, based on what we've seen with the Six Flags properties and the Six Flags parks, and I'm not sure who they're going to be able to draw into their fold.
That is true. That is true. It is worrying that there's not a successor being like groomed like more publicly, for Zimmerman. That is concerning, and yeah. But the other piece too, which I think is interesting, is about the date change. And yeah, and so basically Six Flags is telling everybody, oh, it was just a typo, basically, like it was just a mistake, et cetera, et cetera. Now, Scott, as someone who's worked in corporations, so both of us have, I don't really think it's likely that there was a mistake of that magnitude in the press release. I think it's more likely that it was announced because now there have been quite a few reporters that have talked about, who are more there locally in the area, who have talked about how the site doesn't look like it's at all close to being ready to open, right? It's just not prepared. So there's been quite a few reporters mentioning that. But we also know that when they want something to open, they can just throw money at it. I mean, the amount of money they can throw that will really, they can build stuff very quickly there if they want to. But so I do, again, this is conjecture, right? I do suspect that they probably thought that, I think maybe it's a difference of, again, it's like a cultural difference. Like probably when the site will be ready is probably 2026, but when it will open will be 2025, and it will just open where not everything is ready, but it'll still be open.
If any of our listeners have ever worked in the Middle East, you know as well as I do, you do not open late. Doesn't matter what you open; those gates open on time. And having opened two different attractions there, it's amazing what can happen in the last, I would say, month or even week, as to what gets installed. And there are even times that I have witnessed, not in the attractions that I've worked in, but the attractions that were adjacent, some other attractions, and talking to other people. There were times where things were opened and then sections were opened and then closed again so that they could go back and do it correctly. But they had to open on time. In the U.S., we think about it in many cases as let's underpromise and overdeliver. But the mindset, from at least my experience in the Middle East, is if we announce a date and then we back away from it, that shows weakness. So we don't want to show weakness. We want to show that we know what we're doing. We're completely in sync with what we said we were going to do. We are going to do, and it is going to be the biggest, fastest. I find it interesting that even on social media, we're seeing test runs of the Falcon coaster, Falcon's Flight. We're seeing ads for it looking like the park is completely open and people are playing in it and having a lovely time. So yeah, I think that it was probably an attempt to manage expectations. So that way, if they did open, say they opened at the end of 25 for a sneak peek or a preliminary open or whatever, then open fully in 26. It's just an attitude shift. It's really, if you think about it, it's really no different than saying we will officially open in early 25, or I'm sorry, in early 26, and then do a beta test or a sneak peek or whatever in 25. You either open in 25 or you don't. That's the mentality they have in the Middle East. And when we say we're going to open in 25, we are going to open in 25. I've also found that in many cases, and again, this is conjecture, but in many cases in the Middle East with the construction companies, they don't get paid until the job is done. So they've been fronting salaries for all of the workers, and in some cases, let me put it that way. I don't know whether it's true with everything at Qiddiya City or not, but in some cases they will have to front the salaries and literally hold the people, hold the workers in the country until the project is complete. So I could see it, and this is a hypothetical situation based on my experience, but I could see very comfortably them saying, well, if we're not opening until 26, then we're not paying you until 26.
Mm-hmm.
And companies going, that will shoot 25 in the foot for all of us. So there's a lot of unique cultural issues that are going on here. And to me, it sounds kind of like the American side was trying to say, yeah, we're going to open, but we won't be completely open. And the other side is saying, no, we're going to open. We're going to open, and people are going to be in the door, and we're going to start making our money back, and then we'll pay you.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think it's interesting. I think it's unfortunate because when we were there, obviously when we toured Six Flags Qiddiya, it was nowhere near ready, and we knew it. But that was quite some time ago.
Yeah.
Well,
and even when we were there,
right.
though,
You're absolutely right, though. When you throw money at it, when you have to make, it's amazing how your work schedule can expand or contract to the amount of time you actually have.
That's right. Yeah. See, I actually disagree with some of the reporters just because when you and I were there on site, I was almost shocked at how much was ready then.
Agreed.
In a paradoxical way. Like they had the basic infrastructure, the buildings, the sewer lines, the power, and that's the stuff you can't, I mean, all the other stuff, like, maybe you don't have to open this one section or, whatever. But I mean, as long as you have like the main area we were in, the main hub area, and then there was a few food and beverage locations that were pretty close to opening. That's all you really need. Just open one ride in some food and beverage locations and the main hub, and that's open. Basically, that's close enough, I think, for what they're doing. Then you can open the rest of the lands later. But I think knowing how quickly they work in that region when there's money, I think that they can get there.
Yeah, I don't see it. I was kind of surprised when they pushed the date back originally, because it didn't seem like that was necessary. But again, we were there earlier in the year, so I don't know.
Well, okay, our next story here is about the state of the global attractions industry for the third quarter. And this was put out by IAAPA, and it is basically a synthesis of interviews that they did with their advisory committee, which is about 22 members, that operators that are spread all throughout the world, about trends they're seeing. And basically they identified 3 trends, and then there's information per region, and then there's some additional research they added to it. And the first trend, the biggest one, is of course weather. So I can't. It says unfavorable weather has defined 2025. Many operators report that the spring months have proved wet and unseasonably cold, discouraging guest visitation. By contrast, the early summer months proved exceedingly hot, which also had a negative impact on visitation. Well, geez. And I will just say that also, here in Detroit, where we are, it has been unseasonably warm for a longer period of time. Like it just this week, and we're already halfway through October, is when it started to drop below 65, and the trees started to change color. And so that does discourage people going to haunted houses and going to indoor attractions, because if it's warm in Michigan, you're going to want to do stuff
outside. Stay out
as
long as you can.
Yeah. So there is some to it, right? But at the same time, as we've always been saying over and over and over, at this point, the weather trend isn't a trend. It is just a fact.
And to me, this shouldn't be excuses for why 25 is going to be low. For me, this should be a list of here's what we need to plan for 26.
That's right.
It goes back to that post-crisis leadership mentality of, okay, what did we learn here? And we need to have parallel paths going. If it's too cold, then we need to have heaters for our queues. If it's too warm, then we need to find a way to perhaps move some of our attractions outside. I mean, you need to find ways to deal with this kind of thing. And that's what long range business planning is, and yes, it may have come up, for some reason, weather magically started in 2025. I don't necessarily think that's true, but it's the kind of thing that I think we should all look at. And the takeaway should be plan for whatever, have a plan in place. If you never use it, you never use it. Not a problem. But go through that exercise and find somebody who can, help you with those kinds of plans. It may be something as simple as marketing. It may be market it differently if the weather is rough. One of the things that locally they did here for a while, I don't know whether they're still doing it or not, but Florida Aquarium and Zoo Tampa used to say they had a reciprocal ticket agreement so that if it was raining and you had a ticket to the zoo, you could go to the aquarium. And if you had a ticket to the aquarium and it was a beautiful sunny day, you could go to the zoo. So to me, that's just good business planning. And then they would share in those revenues. So it's making certain, it's kind of going back to the basics. It's making certain that your guests are happy. It's making certain that because the happy guests are going to come to your park.
Yeah, I do think this is a little bit of a pendulum of course, during the pandemic, we went all the way to the one side with ticketing, where we're saying you have to have a date reserved and a time slot reserved, and this whole time ticketing. And there is a lot of merit to that. How much have we discussed time ticketing and dynamic pricing and how much it helps, and et cetera, et cetera. But then on the flip side, if your attraction is not prepared for weather, then I don't think that you can enforce those sort of rules about time ticketing and about you. I mean, again, if you're telling the customer they have to show up in this half-hour window for your attraction, but then parts of your attraction are not open during that time, or there's negative weather on there, I don't think that's going to work. So I do kind of think that we're going a little bit into the other side of it being more flexible, like it was pre-pandemic, But even now with we were talking about last week the Disneyland prices, and Disneyland, I mean, you still have to make your park reservations in California. And then there's, again, that thing. What happens if something closes or this or that or whatever? Well, now and that's a lot of money in that case, and they're not going to give you a refund or let you change your day. Like that's starting to get difficult. This
is a perfect example where time ticketing is beneficial to the company, but not to the guest.
That's right. And I think one example recently that I just this weekend, I visited Hannah Haunted Acres in Indianapolis, and they changed their policy last year due to rain, and they've kept the policy, which is that they have their tickets are good for their 5 attractions, I believe. Any general ticket's good for those 5, and they changed the policy last year to say as long as you do at least one attraction, you can come back any other night that they're open and do any of the other attractions. So if you show up and it does happen to rain and you don't want to go through the corn maze in the rain, then you can come back and do it another night. And they also are open every day in October. Like their Halloween stuff is open every day, 7 days a week. And so you truly can come back anytime. Now, that still doesn't help people that are visiting who are just there for one day. But I think for the locals, it does make a big difference where you can say, and it also, you talked to me about how basically you can cheat the system because you can buy a Monday ticket for $25 and then you can come back on Saturday. And he kind of was saying that it's worth it to him to allow that just because of the goodwill that it buys them, where if price really, really, really is a concern for them, then you just buy a Monday ticket, show up, and then come back with your friends on Saturday. And I think that attitude is probably more where we're going to have to start swinging if nobody can do anything about, like, if the attractions continue to just say we can't do anything about weather and like cross their arms. And then I just think you're going to have to start going to that direction with ticketing.
Yeah, and it's funny because I'm listening to I've gone back and I'm revisiting Make It Stick or Made to Stick and
Make It Stick. Yeah.
One of the things that they talk about, I just listened to it this morning, as a matter of fact. They talk about the guests, the customers. The customers don't want to buy a drill bit; they want to buy a 3/4 inch hole so they can hang pictures of their kids. Guests don't want to buy tickets; they want to have an experience where they have fun. And if the ticket doesn't, is only for this time, the ticket's useless. The ticket is worthless to them. because they can't get in. And I love the idea that, okay, so you get somebody who cheats the system. We're so concerned about cheating the system, but it goes back to, my slice of cheese story. There's so many stories about how when you make a guest-centered choice, that you actually improve your business. It's not detrimental to your business. So I guess my argument, or a con argument, or the opposite argument to the people who say you can scam the system is, okay, but you sold a ticket that you might not have sold.
That's right.
Because if they are cost averse, then
yeah, and most people don't do that. Again, it's back to the whole thing about it's usually like 80 or 70, 20, 20. It's where it's like 80% of the people are just gonna do the normal thing, and then you're always going to get the 10% that are going to try whatever they can to do anything, and then you're always going to get the 10% that will always, you get the really, really good and the really, really, however you want to call it, bad, or the people that want to, but that's not the majority of people. And so
right.
if you're punishing the majority just to prevent something from the minority, you need to just look at it as sunk cost, right? You're always going to get people that are going to claim that they never received the package you sent them, or that it was defective, even though they used it improperly and all that. So you actually just have to plan for that in, rather than punishing the rest of the people by making your policies too strict.
Yep, agreed. And just recognize that what we're selling is not tickets. What we're selling is experience. And anytime we can make that experience easier, better, more memorable, then our revenue. And I know this sounds counterintuitive, and I know there are accounting people out there who are looking at me and saying, Scott, you don't understand. You just don't understand money. But I do understand human behavior. And if people are pissed off at you, they're not going to come to your park.
Yep, that's right. Well, the next trend here, there are 3 trends that IAAPA identified in this quarter. The next trend is uncertainty in the economy and politics also affected consumer sentiment, as guests adopted a wait-and-see mentality before committing to a visit. Yeah, I don't know. I've actually heard. So I've been trying to put together some sort of article about the haunted attraction space and how the trending data is going there. And I've talked to a lot of folks in a lot of different regions, and I'm just getting so many mixed signals. Some markets are up, some markets are down. Some attractions in a market are up and some are down. But it does seem like, talking to some of the owners, a lot of them are saying that it's just, it is due to these things, like whether, and my hypothesis here, again, is that this has been before, is there's 2 things at play, and both of them IAAPA captured. There's the uncertainty in the economy, and then there's the politics of it. And so, like, for example, the attractions I talked to in Chicago say that their numbers are down, and they think it's due to the stuff going on in Chicago, right?
Mm-hmm.
The perceived danger happening there. But then when you talk to people in other segments, they're up, like in Vegas is up and some other markets are up, but you hear people on the other side saying that they changed their ticket options to make them more like the Hannah option, like we talked about, or they changed their ticket options to make it more value option, and that value option is selling better now than, so I've seen both trends, but it's hard because there's so many. It's like everyone is almost saying a different story, and I feel like only with a large amount of data could you really look at it and say, oh, this is what's going on. But it does feel like it's,
and
everything.
I think that just reinforces the uncertainty of things. Some people are, it's there is no clear cut answer, and if we think that this uncertainty is just in the United States, it's not. It's global.
That's
and
true.
That was probably one of the biggest discussions during IAAPA Europe with some of my friends. They were just like, tourism around the world is being impacted because they don't know quite what's going to happen with the U.S. and with the U.S. in conjunction with other countries around the world. There's nobody knows, so no one acts. I think what's going to happen with the seasonal experiences, I think they will make up money as we get closer to Halloween, because people will finally go, well, we've waited as long as we can and we don't want to miss out, so let's go.
Yeah,
that's my guess.
That's right.
I don't know.
That's right. I guess the last big trend, we're almost out of time, so we're going to have to discuss the rest of this on our Patreon show. But the last trend here is just about, while tariffs remain a concern, many manufacturers are optimistic for the years ahead as orders for new equipment to be delivered in 2027 and beyond are strong. So the only story we did hear about the Mattel park in Kansas City that has been delayed and primarily due to tariffs. But so we have again heard about, but we've been talking about that for the entire year. So I think that that's not even a trend. That's also just like a fact of,
And I
the
think that
costs of
I think
manufacturing.
it ties back into the uncertainty as well, because again,
That's right.
you can't necessarily make plans if you don't know what tariffs are going to happen this week. So
That's right. That's right.
yeah. Anyway, all right. Well, we'll probably, if I know Philip and I, we will dive into this tariff thing a little bit more deeply in our Patreon show in Unhinged. But for those of you who are listening here, thank you so much. Please subscribe. If you are watching us on YouTube, please subscribe. We would really appreciate that. Send us your comments. We'd love to hear them. And until next week, on behalf of Philip Hernandez, myself, Scott Swenson, this is Green Tag Theme Park in 30, and we will see you next week.